So now that we know a little bit about arrays and specifically static arrays, we can take our knowledge a little bit further by talking about dynamic arrays, which will grow or shrink to accommodate however much data we have at any point in our code. And the nice thing about dynamic arrays is if we wanted to add this fifth name, if we wanted to add Eddie, and we wanted to do it, halfway through our code once we've already gotten a couple pages worth of code done, instead of having to scroll back through and find where we declared our variable originally, we could just redimension our variable whenever we want. Meaning if our variable was originally 0 to 4, we could change it halfway through the code to be 0 to 5, and without having to come back through and change our existing items. So as an example of this, let's create another public sub. This time we'll call it dynamic array. And this time we'll call our variable students dynamic so that we can see this is our dynamic array. And we'll tell it it's a string again. Now you can see right off the bat, whereas we originally put a sizing in this original declaration, the static declaration up here, we have not put a sizing in our parentheses for our dynamic array. So all we've told the system this time is in our original declaration, here's the name of our array. We can tell it's an array because we have the parentheses here, but we haven't given you a size. This could be any size that we want it to be. And it is string, which means text. And this is different from our static declaration where we said, here's our array name, here's the size of the array, and it is text. So this time, we can resize this array to be whatever we want it to be. And to resize things, you redim them, you redimension them. So we'll go ahead and redimension this as an example, and we'll redimension this to hold up to fourth item. You don't technically need to write the as string at the end of this, and that's because you already told the system that this array is a string. All that we're doing in redim is resizing it, which means the only thing that should change is this value here. So we can actually take this off and hit enter. And now our dynamic array should hold between the 0 and the fourth item. So we can go ahead and set that up. The 0th item will be John. The first item will be James. The second item will be Hannah. Third item, Connor. Fourth item, Christina. And I'll go ahead and set up the fifth item, but I'm going to do it with an apostrophe in front of the line so that it is a comment line and doesn't affect the code at all. The code will actually jump over this line, but we'll have it when we need it in a second. And we'll say Eddie. And then I'm going to create the same input box. This time I'll use X as my variable. We'll ask the same question, which student number do you want to view? And we'll title it student ID again. So this should interact with the user in the exact same way that our other code did. And we'll create the same output box at the end, this little message box that says you selected, and our student's dynamic array variable X. And we'll call the title of this box student name, just like we did with the other one. So these two pieces of code are the exact same for our message box, for our input box. The only thing that's changed is this is a dynamic array because we haven't originally sized it, whereas this is a static array because we did give it an original size. So just to get an example of how this runs and make sure that this is working okay, we'll go ahead and run this code. So we'll go to macros, select dynamic array this time, and click run. It says, which student number do you want to view? We'll say we want to view number 1, and we see it selects James. So we know this is working correctly. So now if we go back into our code, and we take out this apostrophe, and we say, okay, I'm going to give it a fifth item. Now we know that this probably won't work because we've sized this to be 4 items long, but we'll try to run it anyways. We'll go macros, dynamic array, run. And we see it is going to give us an error. and we can click debug and see the error is occurring on the same exact line. Now the difference here is rather than coming back up to the beginning to our original declaration and resizing it there, we can continue to resize this array however many times we need to without changing the original declaration, which means if I type ReDim students dynamic 0 to 5 here, then I will have resized my variable to contain a fifth item. In this case, we're going to say the fifth item is Eddie. And so when I go back to run this, we should see that the fifth item is held correctly. So we'll highlight dynamic array and we'll click run. We see everything seems to be working okay. We'll put in item number 5 and click OK, and we see it has selected Eddie. So we know we have correctly resized our array variable to contain that fifth item. Now one thing that you'll notice is if we try to run this and find our second name, you see it returns nothing. And the reason for this is when you resize your dynamic variable, be careful about where you're resizing it and how you're resizing it. So in this case, we've resized our variable after we've already assigned the 0 through 4th item. And that means that all of this data that we previously assigned, right now it's being dropped. And we don't necessarily want that data to be dropped. And there's a way to prevent that from happening. And so this is preserve. So we'll type the word preserve out in front of our resized variable declaration here. So instead of just reading resize my variable, I want it now to be this variable to be this long. We're going to say resize our variable, but preserve the values that are already in my variable. And this is how long I want it to be. So now that I've put preserve here, this data should not be dropped when I resize my array. Instead, this data will all be kept in the array, and all that we'll be doing is adding a fifth item spot, which we turn around and immediately assign the value of Eddie. So now when I try to run this, and I again look for my second value, we can see it has correctly held all of that data with it, whereas it originally dropped all of that data. So we have preserved that data as we were resizing our dynamic array. So this has some great implications for if you don't know what size array you need to begin with. Here's an array type that you can continue to add items to as needed. You can preserve all your data as you're adding items. So this is a great option for if you're not sure how many or how few items you're going to have in a list. A dynamic array is the way to go. But this does kind of beg the question, if we're going to continue adding items to my list, can I find out how many items I have at the end of my list? And there are ways to calculate that, and that is using the upper and lower bounds of the system. And in this case, the upper bound is this 5 right here. It's whatever the item number is that is the maximum of this array. The lower bound is this number here. It's whatever the lowest item number is that can be within that array. So if we wanted to, for example, find out what the upper bound is, we could create this I integer variable like so. And we could set I equal to the U bound, which is the upper bound, of students dynamic, and hit enter. We could go ahead and create a little message box right here at the end to just tell us what the upper bound is. And if I run this, we should see the number 5 pop up in the secondary message box. So we'll go ahead and do that as an example. Macros, dynamic array, run, and this doesn't matter. We'll just say we want to view the 4th name, which should be Christina, so this part is checking out okay. Now when we click OK, we should see the number 5 pop up, which it does. So this means our system has correctly counted the upper bound of our array. And we could do the same thing with our lower bound. So if instead of the upper bound, which is U, we change this to L bound, which is lower bound, we should see 0 show up in that system. And you can use this in multiple different ways. We could change this to be U bound minus the L bound of students dynamic. So if you had this dimension from 2 to 5, then this would only retrieve, you have 3 different items that you can store data in this particular array that you've created. There's lots of different ways to use the upper and lower bound of the system, but this is an example of how you might use this to count the number of items that you can put into your array. In this video, we covered dynamic arrays and how they can help with unknown sizes of data. In the next video, we're going to talk about creating multi-dimensional arrays, which we can use to cover larger ranges of data all at once.